Okay, you can go ahead. Huh? Okay.
Yes. Nandini, can we start? Can you please unmute her?
Yes, I asked her several times. Okay. Okay. Done.
Jai Bhim, everyone. I'm quite delighted to have you all here. I am Nandini, pursuing an undergraduate degree in history at Miranda House, University of Delhi. Today, I, along with my colleague Arushi, will be moderating the session. She'll be introducing herself.
Thank you, Nandini. Jai Bhim, everyone. I'm Arushi, and I'm currently a second year history major student in Miranda House. We are glad to host you all today for this enriching interactive session.
We welcome you all to the second lecture of the Ambedkar Intellectual Summit 2024, organized in honor of celebrating the life and work of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar on what would be his 133rd birthday. Here, we gather together as a community to commemorate his indelible intellectual work and how he has contributed to the Indian society and still continues to inspire us.
We have had an interesting session this evening only with Dr. Peter Friedlander. Continuing with the same, I would like to thank you all for accepting our invitation for this session. We are privileged to have Dr. Varsha Ayyar, Assistant Professor at Center for Labour Studies, School of Management and Labour Studies at TISS, Mumbai. Her research focuses on the intersection of caste and gender within a resettlement site in Mumbai, a topic that has been integral to the curriculum of urban sociology courses across India. Alongside, her current research includes papers on Dr. Ambedkar, on Dalit feminism, on social histories of religious conversions in Western India. She also teaches foundational courses like Sociology of Caste, Ambedkar's anti-caste movement and social theory, social protection in state, women, work and diversity.
She'll be presenting on the topic, Dr. Babasaheb as a sociologist. Her dedication to the Ambedkarite movement and the alignment of her research towards it is profound, and her presence at the summit will also help us to understand the sociological presence of Babasaheb and how seminal they are in current times. The session will last around 45 minutes, during which we kindly request you all to keep your mics on mute, and after that, the floor will be open for questions. So please wait till the question and answer session. Without taking much time, I invite Ms. Ayyar to start her session. Over to you, Ms. Ayyar.
Thank you so much. Am I audible? Thank you so much. Well, I wasn't expecting that kind of introduction, but I'm so delighted and honored to be here and to speak about the topic, which is very close to my heart, Ambedkar as a sociologist. So for the talk, this is still work in progress. I have divided the talk in 4 sections. The first part, I began initially with providing a concise overview of Ambedkar's return to India, which is also marking the commencement of his organizational efforts and public career, also coinciding with the establishment of Department of Sociology at Bombay University in 1919. This department, famously known as Bombay School of Sociology, holds significance not only as the first of its kind in colonial India, but also across Asia. Now, this is very interesting that despite Patrick Geddes, a Scottish biologist and urban planner, who was being credited with the establishment of the Bombay School of Sociology, Indian sociologist G.S. Gure is considered as the founding father. Now, the subsequent part of the discussion focuses on the sudden rise and interest in the widespread effort to reclaim Ambedkar as a global theorist, particularly within the elite academic circles in the United States of America and Europe. Now, this phenomena poses a fundamental question, which I aim to address throughout the presentation. The third segment aims to analyze Ambedkar's methodology, theoretical perspective, and practical applications through the lens of concepts history, which I've attempted to do here, highlighting only a select of few concepts that in my research suggest that they have received inadequate attention. Finally, the presentation concludes with reflection on the potential dangers of what lies behind canonizing Ambedkar and the contemporary challenges in producing knowledge about his intellectual legacy. Here, my focus exceeds beyond the sociology of knowledge production to encompass the sociology of intellectuals. While my approach may appear critical and skeptical, I ultimately conclude on a hopeful note, emphasizing the imperative of reclaiming radical essence of Ambedkar as a moral necessity, which I'm drawing this inspiration from Gopal Guru's influential essay of theoretical Dvijas and empirical Shudras, for the advancement of radical Ambedkarite sociology. So in the light of this proliferation of scholarship of Ambedkar, particularly from certain regions of the global north, it is clear that his legacy continues to spark intense intellectual engagement as well as debates. In 2018, so I begin with the last couple of years of what is happening in the United States of America. In 2018, Columbia University initiated the Ambedkar Initiative under the guidance of Professor Anupama Rao from the Institute of Comparative Literature and Society. This initiative aims to connect Columbia University with the anti-caste legacy of B.R. Ambedkar, acknowledging his enduring relevance to discussions on social justice, affirmative action, and democratic ideals on the global scale. So ICLS, in their introduction on why they launched the Ambedkar Initiative. Subsequently, in 2019, Gayatri Spivak offered a course titled 3 Men on Emancipation, focusing on the works of W.E.B. Du Bois, Antonio Gramsci, and B.R. Ambedkar, to examine and contrast their perspectives on the emancipation of marginalized groups with a particular focus on gender dynamics. This is in fall 2019, an exact description of her course. In 2021, Harvard professor Durba Mitra published Surplus Women, Female Sexuality, and the Concept of Endogamy, which explores the colonial origins of the concept of endogamy while asserting authority on Ambedkar's ideas within the American diaspora and epistemology. Additionally, Gayutra Bahadur, who initially denied the existence of caste within the Guyanese indentured labor, has emerged as a prominent voice connecting African-American and Dalit Ambedkarite communities. Despite claiming a caste-blind perspective, Bahadur's memoirs identify her as a granddaughter of a Brahmin widow, positioning her as a significant figure in the diaspora Dalit discourse. Within the academic circles, particularly at Columbia and Harvard, there exists a cohort of feminist scholars from diverse backgrounds who find themselves in dialogue with Professor Rao, who has a long-standing history of work on the caste question, Ambedkar, and the Mahar movement. This new generation of scholars, while not predominantly Dalit, or in fact, none of them are Dalits, recognize the central role of caste and social location in knowledge production. Their engagement with Ambedkar is often driven by his global appeal and his stature as a towering figure in feminism and humanitarianism, prompting efforts to reclaim and internationalize his legacy throughout feminist perspectives. Simultaneously, there has been a surge of interest in Ambedkar within academia, particularly among the high caste post-colonial scholars whose intellectual lineages are often rooted in post-colonial studies. For these scholars, Ambedkar represents a new frontier to be incorporated and instrumentalized in the pursuit of knowledge hegemony. However, this trend raises questions about the emancipatory nature of these academic spaces and the motivations behind the newfound claims of Ambedkar as a humanist, global scholar, and even as a decolonial psychologist by non-Dalit academics. The proliferation of scholarship of Ambedkar on Ambedkar in global north prompts reflection on how Ambedkar, once reviled in India, has become such a revered figure by elite intellectuals, particularly those from the high caste backgrounds. While university spaces offer avenues for validation of Ambedkar's mission by Dalit activists, concerns linger regarding the co-option of Ambedkar's legacy and the marginalizations of Dalit epistemologists within academia. Before delving into the centrality of Brahminical epistemologies in universities, in these feminist scholarships, it is essential to acknowledge the traumatic history of Ambedkar and his fraught relationship with academia. Now, this explosion of scholarship on Ambedkar, especially from the global north, and also a certain geography and a particular caste location. Now, consider these. In 2018, Ambedkar Initiative was launched. In 2019, Spivak offers a course on Du Bois, Gramsci, and Ambedkar. In 2021, Durba Mitra, a Harvard historian, presented her paper on endogamy, on the surplus women theory. The surplus women theory has been long recognized as a seminal feminist contribution of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in feminist scholarship by Dalits themselves. Now, this has been completely appropriated by Dhruva Mitra in 2021. And then from there, we have Gayatri Bahadur, who is now the voice, the link between Dalits and African Americans. So we live in the times where everyone wants to have a piece of Ambedkar. On social media, we see progressive voices identifying themselves as Ambedkarites. The number of books, articles, rediscovering Ambedkar in London, Ambedkar in Germany, Ambedkar in New York, and concept history and digital archives are going to be the future of these social epistemologies, which ironically will have Ambedkar and Ambedkarites at the periphery. But at the center of these knowledge production would be the Brahminical epistemologies, as we are witnessing from the global north. Whether these are queer, feminist, or post-colonial. But that's the new trend and the new beginning of Brahminical Americanization of Ambedkar's epistemology. So was Ambedkar so endearing and beloved while he was alive? How was he treated by universities, whether Columbia University, for instance, Bombay University, where he did his undergraduate studies and started his academic career at Sydenham College? How does one understand the most hated man, untouchable, of colonial India in post-independent? How has his name stirred an entire region, the progressive landscape of Maharashtra? Here I'm referring to the 1970s atrocities, renaming of Marathwada University, the Namantar server. Ambedkarites simply wanted to rename a university after their Babasaheb. The Namantar server is a critical site for understanding resistance against the epistemicide. In the contemporary world, where books and articles on Ambedkar are published and heritage materials related to Ambedkar and Dalit movements are being given $1 million in form of grants, we must not forget Ambedkar statues are routinely desecrated in the public domain. We must also pay attention how Dalit bodies encounter caste in unassuming spaces. On one hand, Ambedkar's humanism, democratic ideas are rediscovered, recuperated, and repurposed by the Brahminical Dvijas and the prima donnas of the, or as Gopal Guru would call them, as Bhudevis in global academia. On the other hand, innocent Ambedkarites and Dalits are mercilessly killed. What does global North academia want? Does it want Ambedkar, just intellectual Ambedkar, or does it want to control knowledge production on Ambedkar? And what is perceived to be the emergence of autonomous, independent, democratic Dalit studies? The growing empire of post-colonialism in the global North epistemologies, along with its patrons and grant makers, is the organized threat not only to Ambedkar's epistemologies, but also emergence of independent Ambedkarite voices that are not ready to be assimilated or co-opted merely as their subaltern. The problem with these epistemologies are its silence on the question of Dalit emancipation, which is pre-colonial histories of colonization, and the question of religious identity and deployment of Ambedkar as rising post-colonial star without addressing the caste question in the contemporary knowledge production. Caste is on Ambedkar, on Dalits, on Shudras, and these Dvijas, the theoretical Dvijas, including the feminist scholars, are casteless, above caste, transcended caste bodies and minds that need not be questioned or challenged. That's the contemporary proliferation of knowledge production on Ambedkar in North America. Having made the point that Ambedkar has had the troubled history with Ambedkar, how does one bring back the promise of sociology? C. Wright Mills, one of the most influential American sociologists of our times, gave us, the students of sociology worldwide, one of the most powerful concepts, the sociological imagination. To simplify, neither the life of an individual nor the history of society can be understood without understanding both the sociological imagination, which enables us to grasp history and biography and the relations between these two within society, writes C. Wright Mills. Mills wrote this text in 1959, 3 years after the demise, Mahat Parinibban of Babasaheb Ambedkar. And if Wrights were to discover Ambedkar, he would see Ambedkar as a social theorist, sociologist, much before this emancipatory concept came into existence. And yet, Ambedkar as a key social theorist, as sociologist, was denied his rightful place in academia. So here I begin with Ambedkar as a sociologist and the history of gatekeeping actively practiced by G.S. Ghurye, the founding father of Indian sociology. The recent work of Durba Mitra and Jesus Garza, I'm sorry, I'm not able to pronounce his name, so apologies. So Jesus has devoted their attention to British and Indian sociologists of the earlier 20th century. Identified by the caste and nationality, they became the producers of ethnographic knowledge, and embedded in this process were the birth of racial theories of untouchability and the social control of female sexuality. This ethnographic knowledge thus was concluded as racial and Brahminical. Jesus, in his article, joins the recent scholarly efforts to revise what he calls is to revise the history of social sciences. He says he's influenced by the work of Project Mukherjee, Leslie Weaver, Patricia Uberoy, Nandini Sundar, and Satish Deshpande, and Sujata Patel. Disappointingly, these scholars pay too much of attention on history and Brahminism and colonial racism in knowledge production. Unlike Jesus, I come to sociology and its inegalitarian nature or the egalitarian potential from the works of sociologists such as Gail Omvid, Sharmila Rege, Vivek Kumar, Ramesh Kamre, P.G. Zogdan, and most importantly, Ambedkarites, whose life has been dedicated and devoted to democratize and civilize Indian social sciences by their, which is now in controls of the Brahminical epistemologies. Before I engage with Ambedkar's caste and social identity and his place in Indian and global sociology, we must underline it was the social movements, particularly in Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, that never allowed a total epistemicide against Ambedkar. The Dalit Ambedkarite not only ushered and enriched scholars like Gail Omvid, Eleanor Zeliot, Maxine Bernstein, Sharmila Rege, and recently Anupama Rao, and here I'm mentioning only women scholars, and all through generously sharing the situated knowledge of Ambedkar and anti-caste epistemologies and struggles. Here I want to point out, by focusing on history, we tend to lose on the sight of contemporary knowledge production and its implication for caste question and global knowledge production in the 21st century. Now, coming to the question of Ambedkar as a sociologist. We already know Ambedkar's analysis of caste system is one of the most critical and profound sociological contribution. His anthropology paper on origins, evolution, and functioning of caste system and seminal work, Annihilation of Caste, critically examined the gendered hierarchical structure of Indian society and its impact on social, economic, and political life. It was Ambedkar who first advanced the idea of caste as a social institution and critically underlined the nature of graded inequality. There are several other key concepts that are given by Ambedkar throughout his writings and speeches. I'm restricting myself to the concept history of the few and important and relevant here. So the first is the Brahmin social order. The concept of social order has been explored by various sociologists throughout history. However, one of the earliest and most influential scholars to discuss the idea of social order was French sociologist Émile Durkheim. Durkheim laid the foundation for the sociological study of social order and its significance for understanding the functioning and stability of societies. Durkheim, as a structural functionalist, focused on the shared values and collective consciousness as pivotal to the birth of the social order. Most importantly, Durkheim highlights how roles of social institutions, whether religion, education, state, and law, maintain social order. Social control is a mechanism to regulate individual behavior. Now, Ambedkar, with his brilliant sociological theories, lived experiences, and his expertise from the different fields, gives the concept of Brahmin social order, which has its graded inequalities, division of laborers, just not division of labor, social and ritual hierarchies reinforced by the sacred literature. Linked to social cohesion, social order, and shared values, Ambedkar brings the concept of social conscience in the Annihilation of Caste. The origin of social conscience is also coined by Ambedkar. This is drawn from diverse and multifaceted readings, drawing on theology, philosophical, ethical, and political traditions that emphasize the importance of empathy, justice, and moral responsibility towards others. The concept continues to evolve and shape contemporary discussions about social justice, activism, and ethical behavior in modern world. However, Ambedkar is yet to be recognized as someone who coins the concept. Ambedkar has been recognized as a scholar who coined the term social endosmosis, which is apparently drawn from American philosopher John Dewey. However, what we know as sociologists, it is a term used in sociological writings of Durkheim that describes the process of social interaction and exchange between individuals or groups from different social backgrounds, often resulting in blending or merging of cultures, social groups, sharing of ideas and norms. Another concept that is linked to it and was coined by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was social exclusion, which is the process of social separation, where in social exclusion, where individuals or social groups maintain the distinct boundaries and resist interaction with others. Professor Vivek Kumar pointed out how Ambedkar was not considered as founder of Indian sociology, despite the fact that such concepts of endogamy, graded inequality, social exclusion, social endosmosis, social order, social conscience have been coined by Ambedkar, and they were also well circulated, read, published by leading presses and academic journals of his time. It does indicate that everyone was secretly reading Ambedkar, but not paying the due respect that he deserved when he was alive. Professor Vivek Kumar writes an astonishing, and I'm quoting him, the astonishing aspect of, this is in 2007, is the omission of Ambedkar from the canons of sociology. Despite the fact that Ambedkar was trained as an anthropologist and sociologist from Columbia University, who had extensively written and published on sociological issues like caste, varna, religion, democracy, nation, etc., and had highlighted sociological issues in critical and comparative perspective. His writings like Who Were Shudras, Who Were the Untouchables, Caste in India, Their Mechanism, Genesis and Development, Philosophy of Hinduism, Religion and Its Function, along with his Buddha and his Dhamma, Nation and Nationalism, Partition of India, have thoroughly, etc., have thorough methodological and epistemological content to be declared as sociological. And yet, Ambedkar was not recognized as a sociologist. This is Professor Vivek Kumar saying right in the heart of sociological knowledge production, both in Delhi as well as while he was a Fulbright scholar at Columbia. Ambedkar, despite being trained in sociology and anthropology, and perhaps first, but he was not the first. Before him, there was Ketkar as well, who were trained in American universities. And yet he was not included in the list of founders of anthropology and sociology in India. Now, critics of Indian social sciences have pointed out that Indian social scientists were too Eurocentric, and now it has emerged that even Gure's nationalism is also come under criticism. So Indian sociology is despised because it was too Indologist, nationalist, or Brahminical, or Eurocentric. Instead of getting caught up with colonial, anti-colonial knowledge, Brahminical and non-Brahminical, Ambedkar uses his sociological imagination and his pragmatism to expand and use these intellectual disciplines and diverse multiple sources to unpack Indian society. In his writings of Who Were the Shudras or Origins of Untouchability, Ambedkar uses Indology. He cites these texts to theorize the origins of untouchability that did not have racial origins, that was based on religion. Excommunication as an idea exists in religion and not a racial practice. He makes a nuanced difference between impure, which causes pollution to the Brahmins, whereas the untouchable cause pollution to all. Ambedkar also uses Indology, theology, anthropology, sociology, and his lived experiences along with his peoples to demystify caste, untouchability, endogamy, and caste social behaviors. He's not obsessed whether the knowledge sources are Brahminical, French, sacred, or profane. His prolific citation practice demonstrates his epistemic liberalism and generosity, unlike the contemporary scholars who are obsessed with citing their own caste, nationality, and kind. It was just not American pragmatism and John Dewey that influenced Ambedkar's epistemology of social science. Ambedkar was also reading French sociologists, notably Durkheim and Gabriel Tarde. We already know about Durkheim. Lesser known French sociologist, criminologist, and social psychologist was Gabriel Tarde. In the 20th century, Tarde's Law of Imitation, published in 1890, was one of the most notable and influential work. The work emphasized the role of imitation in social life and argued that imitation is a fundamental mechanism through which social phenomena spread and evolve. Ambedkar brings law of imitation and its influence on the phenomena of practicing endogamy. Todd's Ambedkar's law of imitation is a critical contribution to emancipatory sociology as it shows how Indian society produced and reinforced caste endogamy and regressive practices. Instead, we have M. N. Srinivas and his concept of Sanskritization, similarly based on law of imitation, that has become more popular than Ambedkar demonstrating law of imitation in reproduction of endogamy. Sanskritization, in case for non-sociology students, we know it is a term in sociology which refers to the process in which caste or tribes placed lower in the caste hierarchy try to seek upward mobility by imitating the rituals, practices, speech of the dominant caste or the upper caste. It is a process which is similar to what in American context would be called as passing. For the feminist sociologists, we already know that endogamy and the problem of surplus women was raised by Ambedkar. Now, Kalpana Kanbiran says in her recent work, I mean, it's not recent, but an important reminder where she is highlighting how Ambedkar has been excluded from the sociological canons. She quotes, and I'm quoting her, very early on, Ambedkar offered us a multi-layered counter-hegemonic reading of caste that was lost on at least 3 generations of sociologists and possibly accounts for several of the conservative trends we have seen in the social sciences, in the institutions of higher learning. What she says is that particularly interesting is the silence on the sociological work that emerged at the time, and at least for 3 decades and so on. Well, she questions what are the considerations that entered into building of a corpus of Indian sociology in the latter half of the 20th century that erased Ambedkar so completely. It is here I would like to respond to Kalpana Kanbiran and also intervene as a sociologist and offer a critical response to what I call as novice or late bloomers like Kalpana Kanbiran herself. Ambedkar and his academic writings and thought is a discourse among Dalits for several generations. Ambedkar never belonged to the canons, but to the oppressed people who preserved his writings and speeches. The sociologists taught at the peripheral institutions by Dalit academicians in vernacular languages, women and men, archivists, and social activists who donated their volumes of fortnightlies published by Ambedkar, whether his photographs, his books, his several editions published, which are preserved in chawls or whether bungalows are integral to that Ambedkar. Gail, Eleanor, or Anupama Rao wouldn't have been able to work on Mahar movement without the Mahar epistemologies. And yeah, I would like to broaden it as Dalit epistemologies, which always existed outside academia. The same applies to other castes, untouchable castes, Parayas, Chamars, and other Dalit castes from across India. So moving away from the academic concepts and corpus, I will briefly map Ambedkar's key ideas and mobilization strategies that suggest Ambedkar was not puritanical, but practical in his approach for liberation of the oppressed. The 3 predominant ideas that he proposed and which I'm going to highlight again for the first time in academic discourse are his proposal for social centers, the idea of labor creed is internationalism, and the training school for entering the politics. Ambedkar proposed to have social center in Bombay. Now, history of social centers is diverse and multifaceted in its roots in various social, cultural, and political movements throughout history. While specific origins and development of social centers vary depending on the geography and ideology, nonetheless, the several key historical trends and movements that influence the idea of social centers were in early socialist and labor movements. Ambedkar was influenced by the early socialist and labor movements in Europe. History of social center reflects a rich tapestry of social, cultural, and political movements seeking to create spaces for economic empowerment, collective action, and social transformation. Now, unlike the anarchist movements or unlike the Tolstoy Gandhi farms, Ambedkar was not envisioning these social centers to be rural farmlands, but at the center of urbanity. Another important idea that Ambedkar could not complete but proposed was to start a training school for those who wish to enter politics. And lastly, the idea and statement of labor creed as internationalism belongs to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Although the roots of it clearly emerged from the core principles of international socialist and labor movements, but it was Ambedkar who gave in a radio interview and clearly articulated these words. It is considered as a central tenet of socialist ideology during the 19th and 20th century, as socialist thinkers and labor activists advocated for the rights and interests of workers across national boundaries. Now, key figures associated with the development and promotion of labor internationalism include Karl Marx and Engels. Ambedkar draws from the collective efforts of generations of socialist thinkers, labor activists, and working class movements to build solidarity and advance the interest of workers on a global scale. Now, the specific articulation of labor creed as internationalism represents Ambedkar's shared ethos and commitments to the broader labor movement, which is global. To conclude, Ambedkar was not recognized by Indian social scientists despite his stellar academic contributions, which were widely read and published by his contemporaries. Consider the fact Gure and Ambedkar both took classes of Leonard Hobhouse, who was an English sociologist, philosopher who tried to reconcile liberalism with collectivism in interest of social progress. Hobhouse, in his conception of sociology, drew on the knowledge of several other fields, mainly philosophy, psychology, biology, anthropology, and the history of religions, and most importantly, ethics and laws. Hobhouse is a prominent influence in life of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, but ironically, not in the life of G.S. Gure, despite both of them studied and have taken classes with Hobhouse. Gure was aware of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his presence and writings in Bombay and beyond. In fact, Gure and Ambedkar had links not only through their London education, but also through Wilson College. Gure had illustrious and has had illustrious and prolific students, and Bombay School of Sociology has its own contributions that cannot be negated. Gure's student, G. Pradhan, requested Ambedkar even to write a preface for his book on untouchable workers of Bombay City in 1938. M.S. Gore, who became the director of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, also wrote extensively on non-Brahmin leaders and intellectuals, including Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Vittal Ramji Shinde, and also Mahatma Phule. Despite the global appeal and presence and sharpness of theoretical Ambedkar, clearly he was beyond the twice-born theoreticians, yet he was systematically gatekept by Gure. Just not that, Indian state honored Gure Srinivas with Padma Bhushan much before Ambedkar's Bharat Ratna. Ambedkar was a fiercest radical sociologist who was never recognized while he lived. Ambedkarites in academia and outside academia kept Ambedkar alive. Whether it was their oral tradition, through his books, memories, songs, it was the movements of the streets that finally brought Ambedkar as part of the curriculum. It has taken lives while Ambedkar was denied his commanding presence in Indian sociology. On the other hand, Ambedkarites have laid their lives to keep this Ambedkar alive. To conclude, on one hand, there was orthodox Brahminism embodied by Gure, who systematically put a cognitive blackout, to quote T.K. Uman, on theory of below, which is in the decades when Ambedkar was alive. Now we live in a time where Ambedkar is an intellectual commodity and the latest frontier of post-colonial scholars from New York to London to even Bengal. The route to canonizing Ambedkar in sociology and other social sciences is based on the efforts of Dalit scholars and activists rather than the armchair decolonizing intellectuals. Now, what could be the future of intellectual Ambedkar and what are the challenges? Most Ambedkarite activists do not engage with the scholarly texts written by those who are engaging with intellectual Ambedkar. Reasons for these are many, and I'm not going to delve into them. The recent work that has emerged or emerging from Columbia, US, are trying to whitewash Ambedkar and Brahminize him beyond recognition. Refer to the recent work by Rohini Shukla, almost suggesting intellectual Ambedkar belongs exclusively to Columbia and John Dewey. So the last question one may ask is, what social theory does Ambedkar imbibe? Ambedkar was radical because of his liberal approach to weave multiple disciplines and never forget the lived experiences that he shared with millions of untouchables. Ambedkar thus embodies what C. Wright Mills calls sociological imagination and what feminists have called as feminist standpoint theory even before they were conceptualized. Ambedkar is precious and must be recuperated not only as Indian sociologists, but also global sociologists who shouldn't be allowed co-opting him as an anti-colonial only because post-colonial subaltern studies is in crisis today because of the possibility of emergence of Dalit or Ambedkar studies. So to conclude, and I disagree with Jesus, who writes about Dalit sociologists saying that how are they treated in the fieldwork. What I argue is it is not the fieldwork, but this in the process of canonization, what difference and how Dalit scholars will resist the attempts of Brahminizing intellectual Ambedkar. So that's yeah. So that's the it. Do I have more minutes?
If you want to, you can continue, but it's totally upon you if you want to continue.
Okay, so I'll just come back to the last section, which is to ask that often in social theory, we want to know whether Ambedkar is a structuralist, conflict, Marxist, or feminist. Where Ambedkar was radical because of his liberal approach, and he cannot be called as a Marxist or a feminist. Ambedkar is Ambedkar. And yet, we need to be very cautious that the way Ambedkar is recuperated, not only as Indian sociologists, but as global sociologists, we must engage. Because intellectual Ambedkar is vulnerable and will be co-opted as anti-colonial only because the Brahminical post-colonial subaltern studies is in crisis. And I asked this question, whether Dalit epistemologies can emancipate from the yokes of elite Brahminical feminism and inegalitarian sociology that Vivek Kumar, Ramesh Kambe, P.G. Zogdan so eloquently pointed out. I'm also not interested in the question of whether Dalits can engage in fieldwork as freely as Dvijas, and regardless of the gender. The most appropriate question could be, or the question that I'm interested in is, can Dalits displace, dislocate, and reappropriate and reclaim Ambedkar from the clutches of Brahminical feminist epistemologies of the global north? Can Dalits build Ambedkar an anti-caste archive that is free from the surveillance and authority of the prima donnas or the elite universities? What must a Dalit do to protect their situated knowledge for so long they have shared so freely and generously? So the intellectual Ambedkar, global Ambedkar, does not demand theoretical Dvijas and prima donnas to come in contact with untouchable Dalits, unlike the earlier methodologies, which demanded at least a short-term ethnographies. So intellectual Ambedkar as a project does not demand any kind of social interaction with the Ambedkarites. So the question is not whether Dalits can do fieldwork freely. It is whether they can thwart the ongoing appropriation and co-option of radical Ambedkar in the emerging post-colonial subaltern studies and the Brahminical hegemony in the knowledge production. Yeah, so that is to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you for the very enlightening session, ma'am. You really brought out the question of who gets to create knowledge in a caste-divided society, and you clearly highlighted the dichotomy of appropriating the knowledge production coming from Babasaheb's epistemology and the destruction of his statues and the assault that and the atrocity that happened on Dalit bodies simultaneously. Now I'll be handing it over to Arushi to summarize the session.
Thank you, Dr. Ayyar, for this insightful work. I'll be summarizing it in few lines. So from what I've been able to gape upon, she starts with an overview of how Ambedkar's returned to India and what sociological changes happened thereof in India, and a little overview on his history of work in USA. Then she moves on to talk about how the sudden rise in interest in Ambedkar as a social theorist began across the globe, and what were the societal responses to his movements against caste. She then explores the Ambedkar's role and how his identity has been globalized, and how his life actually was, and how social tolerance and respect is yet missing and not been formed. And differing it with how globalized and intellectualized his work is in the global context. She explains this by explaining the sacred literature and how it installs social hierarchy through processes like endogamy that helps maintain these boundaries and resist interaction between communities. Lastly, she talks about potential dangers on canonizing Ambedkar and how he has been often excluded from the sociological academia. And she critically elucidated by providing examples of how his work as a sociologist have been inspiration for economic empowerment and social transformation of the marginalized, which is very different from how he has been excluded. Okay, so this is how I conclude it. Moving forward, let's start with the Q&A session. Nandini.
Now we will move to the question and answer session. If you have any questions or comments for our speaker, please feel free to raise your hand or type them into the chat box. I and Arushi will try our best to facilitate the discussion and ensure that everyone has the opportunity to participate. But please understand that we are a little short on time, so please keep your questions crisp and to the point.
We had a question in the chat box already from Dr. Pranay Dev from Tripura.
So the question is, what is the difference between Dalit epistemology and general form of Indian epistemology? It's a very interesting question. And this is what I would like to point out, that Dalit epistemology, is it not an Indian epistemology? Or how is it fitted against Indian epistemology? And how is it different? The social epistemology is the lived experience, the theory of knowledge. How do you know certain things? How do you experience it? And Dalits have this social location, which is outside in terms of its excommunication, but a very strategic location in terms of looking at the entire caste hierarchy, which is, they could see the lower caste, the intermediate caste, as well as the upper caste. So that kind of vantage position that Dalits have for seeing society, understanding society, is from this position as an outcast and the lowest of the low, which other general social groups wouldn't have. So did Ambedkar, the second part of the question is, did Ambedkar have any idea of Dalits or Dalit movement to be used for narrow? Of course, he did have an idea that Dalits can be weaponized and will be used for narrow political gains. However, Ambedkar's mission was to really largely address the causes, the ethics that caste society did not allow. The Sikh society, as he refers to, did not allow any emancipatory interest in any interest in general population, but specifically also Dalit emancipation.
We have another question.
So what is the difference between Brahminizing Ambedkar and intellectualizing Ambedkar? Is it about removing the politics in his writing and presenting? Okay, I'm just reading out the question for. The first is, what is Brahminizing Ambedkar? And unless you have read the recent writings of what is happening with intellectual Ambedkar, we wouldn't be able to understand what is Brahminizing Ambedkar. And one example that I gave was repurposing Ambedkar as an anti-colonial scholar is an attempt of Brahminical post-colonial feminism. So that would be, and of course it is done through intellectual Ambedkar, not intellectualizing, but intellectual Ambedkar, which is basically dividing Ambedkar into two parts, which is the Ambedkar that is in the public space and the Ambedkar which is the canonizing, his just writings and speeches. So it is that intellectual Ambedkar that's of the current interest for academics. And also, what would be the Brahminizing of Ambedkar is basically like the whitewashing of Ambedkar, that everything that Ambedkar knows is almost because of American pragmatism. Well, dismissing the fact that Ambedkar has studied at Elphinstone as an undergraduate student, as a he took social sciences, and then he also comes from the Satyashudak movement and also the Mahar movement. So this is kind of an example of just kind of Brahmanizing via intellectual history of Ambedkar. I hope I have answered that.
There's
The question is how. Now, so I'm taking the other question, which is, are Ambedkarites now following Brahmin epistemologies? I wouldn't call it Brahmin, but Brahminical and its allied caste epistemologies. Yes, and I see the examples, particularly in Dalit feminism, and especially Dalit feminism of diaspora. So and this is a work also of, which has been almost a decade ago or so, pointed out by several scholars in Pune at a workshop which was organized by Sharmila Rege. Abhinay Kambe points out about the surveillance, and we see Dalit feminism, especially in diaspora, are influenced by Brahminical feminist epistemologies. The recent work, which was translated on Ambedkar and Mahar prostitute, refers to that. Ambedkar's respectability and also his has been critiqued. Again, we see this is just not the Brahminical influence of Brahminical feminist epistemology, but also the question of respectability, politics of respectability, which is kind of an American discourse, trying to kind of also implemented to Ambedkar's respectability, which is of course very different from how respectability would be understood in the American context. And the second is also Ambedkar's suggestion, one of the suggestions to dilution of caste was through intercaste marriages. And I remember a Dalit feminist activist of an American origin saying that it was a cis heteronormative suggestion, which was patriarchal, and that kind of had an audience, to which kind of it suggests that yes, the contemporary, Dalit feminist. So there's also the current work which claims that there's a departure from Ambedkarite perspective. So I do not know whether I would call them as Ambedkarite unless they kind of also agree to Ambedkar's politics of respectability. But yes, there's the contemporary Dalit feminist discourse in diaspora, which clearly demonstrates that it is under the influence of Brahminical epistemologies. How does one, the next question is by Suhas. How does one avoid appropriation? Well, there are several ways of resisting. I like his choice when he says that this is an epistemicide, which is basically to say that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Dalit scholarship has been systematically devalued, silenced, ignored, and marginalized. But I think the summit is an example of that resistance to that epistemicide, which is kind of looked at as a planned intellectual movement. So for me, I think the sides of resistance has to be engagements, theoretical engagements, rather than just the fieldwork, as his views had suggested. Alongside, it is important to reclaim social sciences and also question and critique the contemporary global North American epistemology, especially the post-colonial and subaltern studies, which lacks epistemic diversity. I mean, there are of course feminist scholars like Spivak and Rao and Mitras of the world, but again, they are just one caste. Like, all of them come from an upper caste location, and that's problematic for the epistemic diversity. So that needs to be questioned. So I do not. Why I'm interested is not looking only at the history, concept histories, and the histories of knowledge production, but also situating Ambedkar in the contemporary times. So what happens to the living Dalit scholarship and living Dalit scholars, and just not in cities, but also these vernacular universities, state universities across India.
And we have the next question in the chat box only.
Okay, there are several of these questions. What is the role of Ambedkarites in the radical Ambedkar? I think I would. It is just going by the geography of epistemology. I think we need more people from Marathwada as well as Nagpur in terms of just Maharashtra. Just speaking of Maharashtra, in terms of interactions that they have preserved, that this is all situated knowledge that can be recuperated for bringing back the kind of intellectual archive and mobilization that is required for the future of both in terms of organizing as well as intellectual Ambedkar. So I'm saying this again only from the places where I have actually studied, which is Maharashtra. A bit of course, that would be also applicable in case of North as well as to South, whether it's Bengal in the East or Tamil Nadu or the North India.
Excuse me, ma'am. Hello.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. My question is: you rightly point out that Ambedkar is the global sociologist, right?
Yes.
But when we think about India, Ambedkar equals to a Dalit leader, or whatever the Dalit movements, Dalit, everything is imposing like that. So how can you justify these things?
No, that's just kind of a caste problem. That despite Babasaheb Ambedkar published his work on caste, presented his work on caste in 1916 and 1917 in Indian Antiquary, which was a highly prestigious journal. He was already published in 1917, even before the emergence of Indian sociology, which came into existence only in 1919. And yet, we look at him as a Dalit sociologist. I mean, like, first we reduced him. We see that he was ignored and kept away systematically out of academia. So it has taken the work of Dalit scholars to, and I would not like to call them as Dalit scholars, but also these sociologists like Vivek Kumar, Ramesh Kamre, Professor P.G. Zogden, Gail Omwit, but Gail Omwit and Eleanor were also informed by the Ambedkarites who were outside academia. So that's kind of a classic caste problem that is inflicted upon Ambedkar, like as a global intellectual, as a global sociologist, but people are going to reduce him as a Dalit leader, and that's kind of the tragedy that we have. But then the other danger that I was trying to point out is this whole enthusiasm of claiming Ambedkar as global, as intellectual, is also then to kind of control him and restrict him as just kind of American kind of an intellectual byproduct of American universities. And that's not, that is also something that needs to be actively resisted. So on one hand, there's this complete annihilation of Ambedkar's intellectual pursuits and journey and theorization. And on the other hand, it is to call Ambedkar as global and as John Dewey's student, or as Edward Seligman's, and now the recent one is as an anti-colonial. So I think that's kind of a classic caste problem. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Well, I like this one question, which is by Mayur, and his question is how Ambedkarite scholars can hijack. That is the Brahmanism of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's knowledge of work. Well, it's a tough question. I mean, and it's not easy because if you look at it historically, and again, if we just go by what Babasaheb Ambedkar has written in Who Were the Shudras, it is absolutely challenging to reclaim Ambedkar from the clutches of the Brahminical epistemologies. So first we see that, and the stages of it is interesting, that we have first devaluing, silencing, and gatekeeping Ambedkar, and now we just have this proliferation of scholarship of making Ambedkar as feminist, as post-colonial, as decolonial, and so on and so forth. It's challenging, but it is something that needs to be done, that needs to be questioned. Now, also a link to this question is, does the question of caste make academics bring some kind of discomfort? Okay, and the second part of the question is linked to environmental sociology. Well, I do not work in that area, but just to speak of whether caste question make academics bring some kind of discomfort. Yes, Professor Surinder Jotka has written about it extensively, that how caste was an embarrassment and to some, and it does bring discomfort. Some actively engage in caste-blinded discourse, like people across academia. Some kind of speak about diversity without talking all kinds of diversity, gender diversity, neurodiversity, but not caste diversity. So there is this discomfort and caste blindness that runs in academia. And the very heart of the knowledge production is ridden by caste hegemony, and especially of the caste of of these people who come from privileged caste locations or dominant caste locations. Okay, so there are more comments. If there are any more questions?
Would like to take more
If you
questions.
don't, hello ma'am, Ashwini this side. Am I audible?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
If you don't mind, can you share your email? I have some questions
I'm sorry?
regarding the work. I want your email. I'm asking for your email if you don't mind.
Yes. Yes, sure. So I will pass it on to Nandini or Arushi. And
Okay, thank you.
so there's
It is really
also.
a fantastic speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So there's this question on what is my take on Ambedkar using the term Dalit. Well, there is a history of, in fact, so also to recognize the fact that a lot of his corpus, Ambedkar's corpus, especially fortnightlies and a lot of these materials and elsewhere, there's some written work that I was also involved in researching, is we do not know, and there's this huge corpus that lies unpublished and inaccessible. But the concept of Dalit, or the term Dalit has been used. In fact, you will come across Dalitistan as well. So that whether it was a preferred term, no. If you see in his writings, especially English writings, he prefers to call definitely not paternalistic Brahminical discourse, calling them as Harijans. Untouchability, untouchables, depressed classes. He's more dignified and attentive to describe untouchables in his writings.
Thank you, ma'am. Though we'd like to take more questions, but we are a little short on time. So moving forward, your insights on the topic have been indispensable throughout the event, and we'd greatly appreciate your reflection or any short concluding comments you might have on today's session.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm very sorry that I'm not able to answer to all the questions, but I just want to say thank you so much, Jai Bhim and Jai Prabhuta Bharat.
Thank you, ma'am. Your insights are the cornerstone of, just I'm beginning with a vote of thanks for all of you. Your insights on the topic, on the presentation, were the cornerstone of our discussions. I would also like to extend a warm thank you to all our attendees. Your active engagement and enthusiastic participation made today's session both informative and enlightening. We would also like to thank Mangesh sir, Swapnil sir, and the whole team of Ambedkar Intellectual Summit for coordinating with us and also providing us with this wonderful opportunity.
We are deeply appreciative of the time, effort, and passion you all have invested in today's event. We look forward to seeing you all in the next session by Jai Singh Nageshwaran on Dalit Visual Aesthetics in Tamil Nadu, that is tomorrow. Thank you for joining us today. Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim. Thank you.